Well, the results are in. Donald Trump is the new president of the United States again.
This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
Trump, the Republican candidate, won back the White House over Democratic challenger, Vice President Kamala Harris. Trump has swept key swing states and holds a lead in others that have not yet been called, but not everyone is celebrating after last night's Republican win, including this American expat living in Regina.
It makes me very anxious. I'm worried about the future of the United States. I'm worried about another Trump presidency and what it will do to Canada and basically immigration. I do have children that live in the U.S.
Today on Blue Sky, we're getting a reaction to another 4 years of Donald Trump. We'll hear from Americans in Saskatchewan and Saskatchewan folks in the U.S., but as always, we want to hear from you, our listeners. What are your thoughts on the results of the American election? How do you think this will affect life here in Saskatchewan and in Canada? You can call us at 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Cheryl Camillo is an associate professor at the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy. She is also an American citizen and has extensive experience working on U.S. election campaigns. And Cheryl joins us in our Regina studio. Hi there, Cheryl.
Hi, Adam.
So, Cheryl, what was your reaction last night? And it was a late night when the election was called. What was your reaction watching it and when the declaration that Trump had won was made?
I share the concerns of the American expat whose interview you just played a portion of. I'm very concerned about the future of the U.S. and its impact on Canada.
What specifically? I know there's probably a few things, but what stands out to you when you think of I have a concern? Is there a ranking? Is there a few things there that you would put at the top of the list?
There are a few very fundamental concerns that I have. One is that I believe President Trump will be further emboldened to erode the democratic institutions of the United States, including the federal executive branches and the judiciary and democratic processes in general. I'm also concerned that he will create more divisiveness and a more divided nation. We saw that a bit, in my mind, in his speech last night, where he did not thank the current president, the outgoing president who had devoted his life to public service, or congratulate or at least thank his opponent, Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, I emphasize Vice President, for her efforts on behalf of the American people.
We're going to get into this during the show, but when you think of the election results and how they could impact people living in Saskatchewan, our listeners may think, well, this may not have an impact on us. And 4 years ago or 8 years ago, when you look back on Trump's previous time as president, did it have a lot of impact? What are you thinking when you say there are a few things that could potentially be warning signs for you and things that maybe could impact us here living in Saskatchewan?
I think it can affect us in several different ways. First of all, economic, if he imposes tariffs, because Canada and the U.S., as we all know, engage in extensive trade with each other. There could be national security threats, especially from the north. I believe that China and Russia are very glad that he won and will seek to manipulate him and have access to the Arctic and the north, which means Canada is in between the U.S. and those countries. And I think there's internal political threats. I believe that the fact that he won, despite campaigning, threatening to put his opponents in his own party in front of a firing line and making statements like that, will embolden several conservatives here, conservative leaders in Canada, maybe in this province as well, and lead them to adopt some of the rhetoric. I believe they already have adopted many of the tactics that the Trump campaign has used. And so I anticipate, as I'm driving by the ledge down Albert Street, there will be more protesters with F. Trudeau signs and other vulgar signs, and the rhetoric will devolve from there.
The post-election analysis of what went wrong for the Democrats is already underway, as you probably have seen if you've been watching and following the coverage. Keith Bogue has been on the front lines of many campaigns and elections. He's a former CBC News chief political correspondent and spent many years in Washington. Keith shared some early thoughts with the CBC's David Common.
It wouldn't surprise me if we, at the end of all of this analysis in whatever long period it takes, the answer is that it's the Reagan question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And to a lot of Americans who maybe are even sick of being told how good the economy has been under Biden and how inflation has come down, they don't experience it that way. Prices and interest rates, a point on prices or in inflation or a point on interest rates, those are the two most significant things that can happen to most people experiencing the economy. I don't really care that much about unemployment, especially when it's low, because they have a job. But they may not like the job they have. They may have jobs, they may have 2 jobs, or they may have 3 jobs, and they may be well aware that the jobs that they have now aren't like the jobs that they had that were high-paying manufacturing jobs, for instance, in the 1980s. But I think that, that was the headwind principally that Biden was running into when he was the nominee, and that was continued to be the headwind for Kamala Harris.
I mean, so many things are unprecedented here. It is so rare to have, this is only the second time in U.S. history that a president has returned to the White House after a gap. He's the first felon. He's the oldest person. He was facing an opponent who was changed 3 months before the election day. What are we to make of such extraordinary events given the outcome of this election?
That we're living in an extraordinary time that has an extraordinary candidate like Donald Trump who can win the White House twice. And people completely miss the reasons for it as the thing is unfolding. Everybody thought Hillary was going to win in 2016, and there was this feeling of euphoria after Kamala Harris took over from Joe Biden, and then the Democratic Party put on really like a first-class convention in August, and she had a great debate, and everything seemed to go her way, and then wham! The first inclination that you get that this is really going south was last night. Everything else looked like it had gone unbelievably well, and that they had managed to pull off a Hail Mary pass and were headed for the end zone.
That's Keith Bogue, a former CBC chief political correspondent, talking to CBC's David Common earlier today. We want to let you have your say today. What do you make of last night's election, potential implications for Canada and Saskatchewan? Give us a call, 1-800-716-2221, or you can email us at bluesky@cbc.ca. Cheryl Camillo is our guest here. Cheryl, you listened to Keith's comments there, and what did you make of the two campaigns and Keith's assessment there that it was kind of a blindside maybe that the Harris campaign wasn't expecting that last night's result, and it was a pretty convincing Trump win, and the Republicans overall did really well across the country.
I agree with Keith's analysis. I am the veteran of several Democratic campaigns, and I agree that the Democratic Party since July, when the vice president became the nominee, ran a very good campaign. They had a good convention, and she was an energetic, enthusiastic, positive candidate. And so I don't think the results last night reflect the campaign work. I think they reflect a social movement that's in place largely, which includes the economic response that Keith mentioned, where many voters were voting to improve their personal financial circumstances, even if those circumstances are already very good.
Yeah, that was interesting, and I saw, I can't remember which network it had, but they're all running exit polls, they're all running issue polls, and at the top of the list, not dissimilar to what we're seeing in Canada in these polls, is the economy, it's inflation, and incumbents have really had a tough time all over the world. Even if they're winning, they're not sweeping to power like they had in the past. We've seen that here in Saskatchewan. We've seen it in other provinces here. Obviously, last night in the U.S., it happened in the U.K. So this is not a new phenomenon that we're seeing. Do you think there's a pattern there with these incumbents just suffering either defeats or lesser majorities because of the feeling out there with people uneasy about the economy?
I think there is. I think the biggest economic problem has been inflation, and voters haven't done a thorough analysis to identify the sources of that inflation, which largely are due to the supply stream being cut off during the pandemic, and that the effects of that unfolding. And instead, they just voted against the incumbents.
We have a caller on the line, Chris in Regina. Chris, what are your thoughts on the Trump presidency and potential implications for Saskatchewan and Canada?
Yeah, I'm horribly disappointed. But I guess it tells us the limitations of polling, because as in 2016, the polls got it very wrong. My concern is for the entire world order. With Trump in power, I think basically that's the death knell for Ukraine's hopes. He's going to basically give Putin what he wants in Ukraine, and so the Ukrainians are going to lose a large chunk of their territory in exchange for ending the war. Trump will also weaken NATO. It's no surprise that in Beijing and in Moscow right now they are dancing over this result. And when the free trade agreement comes up for renegotiation, they are going to play super hardball with Canada. And in the short term, I mean, Trump's talking about all these tariffs that he's going to put in place. That's going to damage Canada economically as well. So, and then the final thing is that I agree with your one analyst. This result is going to embolden people on the far right in this country. This is bad news all the way up and down the board. And the old expression, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I would say to the American electorate, shame on you. That's my take on it.
Chris, thanks so much for your call today. We appreciate it. If you want to join the conversation, you may share Chris's sentiments, or you may think differently. Give us a call, 1-800-716-2221, or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, a man who was born and raised in Saskatchewan has been watching the U.S. presidential race closely. Frank Buckley is a law professor at George Mason University. He's written speeches for Trump and the Trump campaign in the past, and he's joined us on the line. Hi there, Frank.
Hey, good to talk to you.
Frank, you've been listening in on the show so far. I'll get to your reaction to what people have said, but what's your reaction to last night's results?
Well, I was delighted. I think it was a vindication of a strategy that began in 2016, in which the Republican Party reinvented itself as a working party. So, yes, I helped write speeches on that subject, on foreign policy, and again this summer. And I'm vastly amused at how people on the left, your listeners, just don't have a clue about what's going on. I mean, to begin with, the terms left and right don't make sense the way they did in the past. The Trump movement was a Republican Workers' Party movement, which is the title of a book I wrote. And in Saskatchewan terms, I think you might want to compare it to the old CCF. I mean, really early on, I told Jared Kushner, Canadian Medicare is not as bad as people say it is, and, we can do better. And the next day, Trump said that, and nothing happened along those lines. Trump ran into a right-wing Republican Party in Congress. I always thought it would take 2 election cycles to turn the dial in the right way, and perhaps we're there at this point. I suspect we are. So, on the Republican side, Trump discovered the sweet spot in American politics, which is economically middle of the road or even slightly left of center, and yet socially conservative. On the right, on the left, the Democratic Party is now an elite party. It's an aristocratic party. It's the difference between the CCF and the Dippers, right? Their issues, they've departed from the old idea of material welfare, the T.C. Douglas kind of party, or the FDR party. And so they've taken up all these elite issues, and you may know them by their mating calls, right? The world is flat. Call me by my pronouns, and climate change is real. And that's just not where Americans are at this point. They are indeed particularly concerned about economic welfare and about inflation. And the point is, they couldn't trust Kamala Harris, or they couldn't trust the Democratic Party not to simply continue what they've been doing for the last little bit, which is printing money and increasing the debt. They wanted an end to that. Look, the American economy is a stupor mundi. I mean, we're doing fantastically, but it's not shared well with many ordinary Americans who came out to vote yesterday. So I think your listeners might be, well advised to forget about listening to the paranoids out there who say it's the end of democracy. We've had a lot of experience about the end of democracy in this country in the last little while with a Democratic Party that has wanted to criminalize political differences. All those efforts, all the smugness from the left about how the guy's a felon and so forth, all of that simply energized the Republican base. We see what you're doing, and we don't trust you. And we think that democracy is better protected by Trump than by a Democratic Party.
Frank, what do you say to folks who think that a Trump presidency could be negative for Canada, given tariffs, given immigration, with what the Republicans have campaigned on during this campaign about people potentially coming to Canada because they're no longer welcome or wanted in the U.S. Other issues around trade. What would be your thought on that specifically?
You're listening, by the way, to a German Shepherd over here, if you're hearing any noise in the background. Trump did not get along, or does not get along, with the Liberal government in Ottawa. Were there a change of government that might help? You can always hope that economic rationality will supply that which friendship might otherwise have provided. So, with respect to things like the auto pack in Ontario, that's mutually advantageous, and so much of our trade is that way. But Trump, I'm afraid, takes a short-term view of these things. I'm certainly not on board with respect to Trump policy with the Republican Party or the Trump Party.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that so many people on the Trump right, the talking heads in the right, all of these people are my dear friends, have the idea that tariff policy is kind of a magic bullet, and it's not that. And I think that if Trump is found it difficult to do trade deals with Canada, he couldn't do trade deals with any country in the world. I mean, what country is more alike than Canada to the United States? Or, who would be the easiest country to cut a trade deal with? But on that subject, frankly, I fault Trump.
Cheryl, I want to bring you back in here. You've been listening to Frank Buckley's comments. What's your reaction to some of Frank's analysis on where he sees it from down in Virginia?
I have a few responses. First of all, he said the terms left and right don't make sense, but he used those terms multiple times, more than a half dozen times. No one else has used those terms up to that point on this show today. Second, he said that it's smug for Democrats to point out that the incoming president is a felon. He was convicted of 34 felonies by a jury of his peers, including Wall Street professionals. That's not smug to point out. It's a fact. To the point about the American economy not being shared well, if you look at the platforms of the two candidates, it was the Harris platform that proposed steps, measures to share the wealth that the American economy does generate, because it is a strong economy. It has been for the last 4 years. The Project 2025 platform that is associated with Trump, because it was developed by some of his team and those that he is closely aligned with, would not spread the wealth of the American economy, and it would erode democracy despite Frank's protestations. It would take the bureaucracy, the federal bureaucracy, public servants, and remove their protections as civil servants and put them under the direct control of the president so that he could act like he's running the Apprentice show again and call in a civil servant and say, "You're fired because you put something in a briefing note that I didn't like." That's eroding democracy.
Frank?
Yeah, just listen to people like that and you'll be totally uninformed about what's happening in America. There is a problem about sharing the wealth, and it is not the case that Americans are just too stupid to understand that the Democrats are good for them. I think they also understand that there have been structural problems in our economy, and in particular with respect to the loss of the American dream. I mean, this used to be the country where whoever you were, wherever you came from, you were supposed to be able to get ahead, and your kids would have it better than you would. And for the first time in 2014, when polled Americans said, well, that's not happening, and there were reasons why that wasn't happening, right? And there were reasons connected with an elite Democratic Party, an open borders policy, for one thing, a regulatory state on steroids. Frankly, most Americans, I think, would be quite happy if Trump came in and got rid of a whole bunch of civil servants in the manner of Andrew Jackson in 1828. Nothing particularly wrong with that. And indeed, if that happens, it's called democracy, right? I mean, we have elections matter, and when you have an election, it's good to change the form of government a little bit if that's what the people want. And I think what the people would want, I think what Americans voted for is a measure of regulatory relief. And you won't get that easily unless you get in there and change the civil service. And that's what that's about. As for the 2025 plan, again, these are my dear friends. I know them well. Trump is a lot smarter, or at least has better political sense than most of the people on the conservative side here, the Heritage Society folks. So we'll wait to see what happens in that respect. The funny thing about all this is from the left is they'll pick up on buzzwords, right? 2025 is a buzzword. We don't have to know a damn thing about what's in it. All we have to know is that it's on the wrong side, and therefore, we're going to flip on that one. We're going to go crazy on that one. I mean, there's a history of paranoia here, which to understand that, think about Elon Musk, for example. You go 5 years back and the guy's a complete hero. And then he decides he likes Trump, and all of a sudden he's being investigated by about a dozen different Washington, D.C. bureaucracies, right? The EPA, and I can't even go into them, right? So that's not exactly, the rule of law. I think the rule of law has something to do with after there's an election, you get to change things. And I expect that will happen. But, here I am. I'm the guy originally from Saskatchewan who worked on the Trump campaign. And whilst it's the case that so many people on your listeners seem to think, not merely is it horrible, but it could happen here, right? You should be so lucky is my view.
Frank, really appreciate you joining us today and sharing your perspective. Thanks again for joining us.
I'm delighted to be on old CBK. I was a kid and I'd listen to CBK when I went to school at 8 o'clock in the morning. They played the Largo from Handel's Xerxes. So good memories.
Thanks, Frank.
Take care.
That's Frank Buckley, a law professor at George Mason University. He was born and raised in Saskatchewan, as you heard. He wrote speeches for the Trump campaign in the past. If you want to join the conversation, we're talking about the American election, 1-800-716-2221. We want to start with Jack in Humboldt. Hi there, Jack.
Hello, good morning, or good afternoon. Yeah, I just want to balance out a lot of the callers that have called in, and they're all despondent and freaking out and carrying on and so forth. I couldn't agree more with Mr. Buckley that was just on. Look, we're not a democracy. The United States is a constitutional republic. It uses democratic tools, and I think that those were demonstrated last night in a sounding victory over wokeism, leftism. This Saskatchewan would be so lucky for the right and the Conservative Party to be emboldened. I hope they move forward accordingly, and they put to bed a lot of the false misinformation about Putin dancing and Beijing being excited. I mean, this is a bunch of nonsense. The United States is going to be better than ever. It will be better than ever. That's guaranteed. And look, end the pronoun stuff, end the anti-white pro-degenerate stuff, and your Democrat Party will fare better. Don't do that stuff. And the man on the street who's sick and tired of this, and as you can drive through the United States and see, people are fired up, ready to go. And yeah, there's a mandate, and hopefully Trump exercises that properly.
Jack, thanks for your call today.
Thank you. Thanks for your call today.
We want to check in with Mike in Regina. Hi, Mike. You're on Blue Sky.
Yeah, hey there. Just want to address the previous two callers. Could not disagree more with their stances, specifically Frank Buckley. And I find it comical that a law professor would just offhand deny climate change. He sort of instantly lost all credibility the moment he did that. I don't think the issue is an economic issue. Clearly, the country of the United States is polarized. But I think the problem for me is, what does the election of Trump represent in terms of American values going forward, right? So this is a man who is a bigot. He is a misogynist. He is not pro-LGBTQ in any way, shape, or form. He is pro-life. And all of these things, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of values do we want as a society going forward? Do we want values that are antiquated and that haven't been in vogue for 50, 60 years? Or do we want a rehash of the 1950s and all the racism and the social inequalities that came within that? And to elect a member as your leader of one of the most powerful countries in the free world, who's a convicted felon, a sex offender, has been on the record disparaging immigrants, disparaging women, disparaging gay and homosexual people. Like, it's just crazy to me, right? And the Republicans do this dance where they couch their arguments in denial and in sort of buzzwords of wokeism, but none of that is true. And the people of America need to wake up and figure out what type of country they want to be going forward and what type of values they want to represent going forward.
Mike, thanks for your call and sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
We have an email here from Roy, and just kind of plays into what Mike was saying on the call there. Roy says, leaving aside considerations of progressive versus conservative, the sad fact remains Americans have just elected a 78-year-old convicted criminal who has been married 3 times and cheated on all of them. How would any woman vote for him? Millions did. This so-called astute businessman had 5 companies go bankrupt in 1 year. He thinks nothing of closing down a company and throwing thousands out of work, but he secured the blue-collar vote. This is a man who said during the campaign Hitler did some good things. Americans are okay with that. Trump made enough foolish statements to lose 10 elections, yet he won quite handily. I no longer know or understand our American neighbors. I'm not sure I want to. That email is from Roy. Roy, thanks for sharing your perspective. We're going to get to another caller here who's been waiting patiently on the line. Dwayne is in Carrot River. Hi, Dwayne.
Good afternoon. I'm just absolutely astounded at the naivete of the American population. How in the world they think that even 1/10 of what Mr. Trump said he was going to accomplish, that he would be able to accomplish. Let's start with immigrants. Immigrants are going to come to America for my life and the next life and the next life after that. And he's going to stop all that. He's going to stop people coming in from Mexico. Well, if that was going to happen, it had happened a long time ago. He's going to make Canada spend the right amount of money on military things. My goodness, do people in America not know that the only reason that we have these wars around the world is so that companies down in Texas and various places can make billions selling armaments? Are they so naive that they think they can change the way someone thinks about their gender? The religious right tells us that they've got freedom of religion in the United States, but only if they believe in the same religion they believe in, and on and on and on. And as far as I'm concerned, I was trying to think of one thing that Trump's election was going to change in my life, and I can't think of one thing. I have my own home paid for. I have a pension indexed for inflation. I have food on my table. I have a car. I have friends and neighbors. And I don't know why people want to live in fear of what Trump says is going to happen if he's not in charge. And the only good thing is that he only gets 4 more years to dance around and fool the public, and then he's gone. And he can't do all that much damage in that much time. And I'm just totally amazed that the people that I used to think were an intelligent, free nation of the world have allowed themselves to get to the level of stupidity that they have to do what they did yesterday.
Dwayne, thanks for your call and sharing your perspective. We appreciate it. Our next caller is Jake in Saskatoon. Hi there, Jake.
Hi, thanks very much for taking my call. I just maybe wanted to add a slightly different perspective. It's very telling, given that this is an election that's taken place south of our borders, just how polarizing this is for people here, and everybody's getting worked up. Your law professor, I think, carefully chose his language, but it was also very telling how he chose to talk about things. There were still some factors in there that were polarizing, and I'm not sure what to make about the comments from one of your previous callers about the Democrats pushing pro-degenerate stuff. It's very concerning. Maybe to add some light and some unexpected positivity. I'm a father of 2 teenage daughters, and certainly looking at what's been going on south of the border is rather concerning in that regard as a father of 2 young women. In 2016, when Trump was president for the first time, of course, he's in the news media. We're hearing lots about it. Even the kids that were at school, one daughter was in grade 3, the other daughter was in kindergarten at the same school. They're hearing comments in the playground. Lots of your callers are probably going to recall Trump making comments about grabbing women by the crotch and how he was able to do that because he was rich. That spurred some conversations in our home at the supper table that we as parents were perhaps not preparing to broach at that young an age for our children, but they were hearing these things publicly. We made sure our girls knew what their rights were, how they should expect to be treated and regarded, and what was not okay. And I can say, over those years since 2016, we've raised 2 very fierce, capable young women who would not tolerate that kind of regard or treatment of themselves or anyone in their vicinity. And so maybe there's some positivity. If everybody's looking at all the doom and gloom, there may be a flip side of this, is that this can help enable further discussion and take us maybe in a direction individually that we would like to go in, whether we agree with the politics or not, because we have to take a step back and maybe recognize that we're being polarized ourselves and keep ourselves in check. That's all I want to say.
Jake, thanks so much for sharing your story and your perspective. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Aurora Mariani lives here in Regina, but is originally from Buffalo, New York. Now, politics in the U.S. have become top of mind for her when she needed emergency procedure last week. She had an ectopic pregnancy. That's when egg implants and grows outside the main cavity of the uterus. And while she said it was terrifying, she was able to have the life-saving surgery that is banned in some U.S. states. And she spoke to CBC earlier this week.
My procedure was seen as emergent because at any point, because the embryo had grown to a certain size, at any point my fallopian tube could have ruptured and I would have bled out and died. Thankfully I was in a hospital, so it would have been much different, but had I been home or at work or, out shopping or something like that, that would have been something that could have killed me. And so it was emergent that I get that I receive that care. I was full of a lot of righteous anger and rage on Friday night when I was wheeled into surgery because my diagnosis or prognosis in many states would have been death. I'm full of a lot of fear, but also hope. I'm really, really hoping that Kamala wins because I can't imagine what would happen if the Republicans got another 4 years, because they've already done so much to set women's rights back and LGBTQ rights. And I don't feel anyone is safe in that country under the Republicans unless you are a rich white man. I talk about the elections with a lot of friends and family here, and we all kind of have the same level of fear, mainly because what happens in the U.S., it trickles here, and the hatred and the divisiveness, it spreads here because the U.S. is just so big and it controls so much of what we consume in culture and media, and that anytime somebody gets up in front of a microphone and spews anti-trans hate or wants to take away the reproductive rights of women, that spreads here. People consume that and then spread that here. There are a growing number of our own MPs and MLAs here in Canada that want to restrict access to abortion and reproductive rights. And so what happens in the U.S., it does affect us here. And so it's something that we care about a great deal here.
That's Aurora Marineri, who lives in Regina but is originally from Buffalo, New York, and she spoke to CBC earlier this week. Cheryl, you heard that. Aurora's an expat like yourself. What did you make of her comments?
She's a Buffalonian like myself.
There you go.
I'm glad that she got the care that she needs. And I echo some of the fears. My family still lives in Buffalo, and I'm concerned for them. My nephew, my niece, my great-niece are all partially African-American, and I fear for them. I want to respond to the question that Mike and Roy posed about American values and what Americans want. I think what we saw was that 51% of Americans, and by the way, so far, with the returns that have been counted, Trump's margin of victory in the popular vote is smaller than that of President Biden over him 4 years ago. But I believe about half of Americans want to live in the world of reality TV and not in the real world. And what I mean by that is they want to be like Donald Trump in that they can do whatever they want, whenever they want to, so they can take what they want, they can grab what they want, and get away with it, have complete immunity, and no legal restrictions or consequences or need to apologize. And I think they want to be him, and that's why they support him.
That's interesting because you have a perspective of people are trying to figure out, what is the attraction they're critical of Donald Trump, and the people that support him, they'll have their own opinions on what attracts them to the Republican Party or what his message is, or picking certain things out of there. Thanks, Cheryl. We're going to get to Kevin in Regina, who's on the line and been waiting patiently. Hi, Kevin.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks so much for all the other guests' comments. I think they really demonstrated just how intelligent us Saskatchewan folk really are. I do object to Frank Buckley's comments. He's nothing more than a Trump apologist. That's quite plain. Saying, convicted felon, this disgusting monologue, just sweep that under the rug. So as much as he portrays himself as an expert, he's nothing more than a Trump apologist, and I'm glad that other callers have taken him to task on that. Quite frankly, we need more love in the world, less hate. I think Hawaii needs to secede to Canada. And the GOP, quite frankly, has sold its soul to the devil and managed to fool the American public. So I'd just like to say again, Canada is far greater than the USA. Thank you so much.
Kevin, thanks. That's the first time someone has suggested that we take Hawaii in all of this. So I'm sure that our vacationers would appreciate that. James on the line in Saskatoon. Hi, James.
Good afternoon. So I find it really discouraging that so many people that identify with the democratic values can't take this opportunity to pause and do a little bit of self-reflection on what it is that the other side is trying to say. It's reprehensible to me, unfortunately, to the degree that the Main Street media has really forced so many divisions, and to the degree that it is, it's very unfortunate, because I tend to think that we have seen many of the reasons of why Republicans have found the necessity to want to marshal back, and I tend to think that even people like liberals like Bill Maher have identified that there was just too much from the left. Its capacity to try and push people or force people into some kind of an acceptance of craziness. And that's the unfortunate thing. So, like right now, what we see, instead of Democrats being somewhat reflective in how their side didn't necessarily offer voters a solution, right? They just tried to say the other man was bad, and forget everything else that we stood for, and it's really sad. It's really disheartening, and to somehow create some kind of moral superiority that you have no capacity or no necessity to listen to that majority of people who have a difference of view. And as I say, I think that it's optimistic as to how things move forward. It is undeniable the effect that this is happening, not only just from the Donald Trump's perspective, but he won the Senate, and it looks like he's going to win the House. So that's not by small measure, is it?
James, thanks for your perspective and your call today. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring Cheryl in here on that point that James made, because we have an email from Peter here is on this similar thing, talking about the 2026. And he says this is the next important date. That's when the 1/3 of Congress was reelected. Americans can fix anything broken in 2 years. Congress is very close in numbers now, so Trump has to be careful. That's Peter's perspective. James was talking about that there could be a House, Senate, Congress sweep. Two things can be true at once. You can have people support Donald Trump and also have the Democrats, run a good campaign. Or the Democrats could have some soul searching and look back and say, well, we made some mistakes. Maybe we miscalculated the American electorate, and maybe it wasn't all Trump's bad. Vote for us. What do you make of how the Democrats move forward here and reflect on this, which could be a sweep from last night?
First of all, I'll say that where Americans voted on specific policy issues, and that's when they voted on statewide ballot measures or initiatives on specific topics such as abortion or legalizing marijuana, which are usually considered by callers like James to be leftist issues, in the majority of those cases, they voted in favor of those. So that shows you where Americans stand on the issues. Regarding the next election in the cycle, which will be the so-called midterm election, I think that there will be an opportunity for the Democrats to regain the House or Senate. Like you said, it does appear that they've lost both. And they will need to think hard, and I think they will, about how to communicate with Americans about issues and in such a way that they get that support. But I think they need to go deeper and get into the social reasons why Americans, 51%, only 51% voted for Trump, but then voted for Democratic issues.
And I was looking, I believe, I think maybe the Washington Post or someone had an infographic last night where it showed the arrows. I don't know if you saw this one, and it was shaded arrows, and it was red or blue. And the thicker shade indicated where the Republicans or the Democrats had made gains. And it looked like in most places, this was late into the night last night, but I didn't check this morning, that the Republicans had gained from 4 years ago, and that Kamala Harris underperformed some of Joe Biden's numbers. And that would have been a surprise, I think, maybe going into last night, at least hearing from the Democrats publicly. What do you make of that, given that there was so much hope for Harris in the campaign that she would outperform Joe Biden, and really the opposite happened?
Frankly, I attribute that in a great deal to her gender and her racial and ethnic background. I think Americans demonstrated once again that a certain segment of Americans do not want to see a female president. And they showed it by making comments such as she has no preparation for the job, she has no background. Not only had she won prior to becoming the nominee for the Democrats, more election campaigns than Donald Trump had run and won when he first ran for president, she had run and won more than George W. Bush when he ran for president. In the state of California, which has 40 million citizens or residents, as many as Canada, and has very highly and hotly contested primaries and general elections.
We have an email here from Kevin who says, as far as the impact on Saskatchewan and Canada, if he follows through with his plan to implement sweeping tariffs on imports to the U.S., as Cheryl's mentioned earlier in the show, it will be damaging to the economy of both countries. Beyond that, I fully expect that his presidency will be rife with corruption and self-dealing. The rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer, and the people who voted for a leopard will act surprised to see that the leopard ate their faces. It's strongly worded from Kevin there. It has been a little bit of a mixed bag here, and not everyone is calling in or supporting. We had Frank on the show to offer his perspective as someone with background at Trump, and people may disagree with what Frank says, but there are a lot of people that share his perspective or some of his thoughts. Going forward, Cheryl, how do we talk to one another in this country and with your friends and family back home and their neighbors when we have this 51-49 split? We have, as you said, people voting for quote-unquote progressive issues on one hand and then voting for someone who's been criticized as not being progressive on the other hand.
I have two recommendations, which I believe those who are experts in communication would also share. One, don't use labels when you're trying to bridge divides. So throw out the term woke or the term paranoid and speak truthfully to each other about what your true wants and needs are, and don't hide behind made-up reasons.
We're going to be talking, I know, about this in the future. We have a lot of time ahead of us to kind of reflect and discuss the election. And there's criticism from time to time, like, should CBC be discussing American politics, and should we have the Trump or Kamala Harris's speeches on our news network? What's the importance to Canadians, as someone who's from the U.S. who lives here, to be following this and engaging in it as much as they want to or can stomach, depending on who they support?
Because American dynamics cross the border as easily as people cross the border and goods and products cross the border. And I've seen in the 9 years I've lived in Canada, with the perspective of someone who grew up on the border and listened to Canadian TV and radio every day and crossed the border 3 times a week to play hockey, that Canada has become increasingly like the United States in embracing some of these divisive ways of communicating and embracing policies like gun ownership and climate change denial in just the last few years.
What are you going to be watching for next?
I'll be watching for whether or not individuals demonstrate the desire to come together and figure out a collective way forward and embrace a term that the vice president used often in her campaign, which was joy. Kevin, one of the listeners who called in, used the term love, but I think that joy is something good for our communities and our societies to pursue.
Cheryl, thanks so much for joining us and your patience as we took callers and listened to other guests. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's Cheryl Camillo, the Associate Professor at the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy. She's an American citizen and has extensive experience working on election campaigns. She lives in Regina, and she was in our Regina studio today. Our thanks to Cheryl. Thanks to all of our callers, our emails. Thanks to Frank Buckley for joining us as well from the U.S. Well, crime is a civic election issue in most Saskatchewan cities, and while everyone wants a safe and vibrant downtown, not everyone agrees on what would improve things. On tomorrow's Blue Sky, we're bringing you voices from downtown Saskatoon, Regina, and Prince Albert. We'll hear from people who work on the front lines of addiction and homelessness and people representing downtown businesses. Is crime and downtown vibrancy an election issue in your community right now, no matter where you live in Saskatchewan, including those 3 cities as I mentioned? You can join the conversation with us on Blue Sky between 12 and 1 on CBC Radio 1. If you want to watch back and listen back to today's show, it'll be posted. It's also going to be posted on YouTube. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Nicole Huck and Chris Haynes, our team here on Blue Sky. I'm Adam Hunter. I'll be in for Alicia Grabinski again tomorrow. Talk to you then.